I am so excited about this great conversation we're about to have with a retired Army veteran who wanted to share his story on how he moved through drug addiction to service to helping other veterans.
Welcome to Awakening Soul Divinity, your sacred space for deep healing and transformation. Listen to inspiring conversations with healing experts, spiritual guides, and teachers as we explore ancient wisdom, modern healing, and powerful stories of change. I'll also share practical insights from my personal journey, from spiritual crisis to inner purpose. Whether you're seeking to overcome anxiety, embrace your true nature, or awaken your higher self, this podcast offers guidance to help you transform your life and elevate collective consciousness.
JJ, welcome. I'm so excited that you decided to join me on this journey.
Well, Carolyn, thank you for inviting me. It could be a fun ride or it could be just an interesting one. Let's see how it goes.
Sure, why not? It's just one of those days, I'm telling you right now. Anyway,
Sure.
yeah. So I want to start out with I'd like for you to briefly share a catalyst or adversity, challenging experience that led you on the path that you're on today.
Well, I would say that it's kind of a combination of things, and then it kind of came together after I came out of the military. But growing up with in an environment where there was child abuse, some homelessness when I became a teenager, and also that homelessness led to a bunch of drugs and alcohol and woe is meing about myself and a lack of confidence and violence and the whole nine yards, to serving a military career where some of that stuff actually came in handy. Some of it was destructive, but I grew and I learned and I was trusted and I did a lot of great things. And then I got out of the military and I kind of went right back into that self-destructive space because we all know when we transition, we kind of have some interesting things happen with how we see ourselves as our identity, from what we were to what we can be and all that sort of stuff. And I did go into a depression for probably about, it was close to a year and a half. And the main traumatic event that kind of turned all of that around. It's interesting how a traumatic event can turn things around. But my brother, who at the time was 35 years old, he's 3 years younger than me. He passed while I was home visiting. And, he really never left Iowa. He never traveled. He never worked anywhere else, lived anywhere else. And he kind of was always low income, struggling the same way my parents did while we were growing up. He kind of fell into the same pattern that we all grew up in. And then he passed. And with my history, combat operations, moving away, doing all kinds of travel, being in potentially more questionable situations than he could have potentially run into here, I asked myself, why me? Why him instead of me? Why did he have to go and I'm still here? It was kind of a divine question, right? Because it made me ask God a lot of questions. And the answer that I got, it was very clear through conversations with other people. They were all saying the same thing. And I believe that was the Lord speaking back to me, was him saying that because you're not done. And so when I came back, I started working. When I came back to Virginia, I started working. I worked a few jobs. I found a niche for myself in the workplace, turned myself around, and now I'm a leadership coach. I have a podcast where I showcase military personnel and that have started a business. And then I also talk to a therapist buddy of mine who's also an Army veteran. And we talk about bridging leadership coaching and therapy. And it's, my life now is actually very rewarding. And thank God for that.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because that I can't even imagine going through something like that. I mean, that's got to be really, challenging, hard, scary. I don't even know what word to use, but you endured, you worked through, you found who you were, the truth of who you were, and brought that out into the world in a way that created a business to be of service to people. Because that's what I like to show people on this podcast is that, it doesn't matter, so to speak, where we've come from, because that's part of our growth. That makes us who we are. And when we get to a point where we're willing and ready and, I can't, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, that sort of thing. And when we take that leap and stick with it and be consistent and persistent and, all these things, we can create a life, like you're saying, we can create a life that's like beyond what we could have ever expected. And then even with that, to be able to still have the capacity to grieve and love and move forward and all that kind of thing. It's like that is huge. And then I'd like to also add, there are a lot of veterans that get out of the military that are depressed, and there are a lot of veterans who don't know how to get out of that depression. Can you give maybe a little bit of, I don't like to use the word advice, but suggestion on what it takes or what you did or something to help these veterans that are leaving the military? Because that's not an easy thing to do for a lot of them, especially if they're combat veterans.
Yeah. So, I may say, I do say that I snapped out of it, but I didn't. It wasn't just a snap of a finger. It was divine to me, but even
Mhm.
before that, I worked really, really hard to try to find more people that felt the same way I did. The VA, that therapy is great if you also create the right environment for yourself outside of therapy, which I didn't for the longest time.
Yeah.
But, I moved on to talk to some other people even outside of the VA, and they're like, well, I'm a part of a really good group over at the DAV. It took me a while to get the confidence to do it, but
Mhm.
I kind of found my community over there in a couple different support groups over there through the DAV in Virginia. And, you know, it was great. We went around the round table. We talking about things and sharing our experiences, and it was not judgmental.
Mhm.
Some people had heavy combat experience, and then there was some that I had some combat experience, but it wasn't the same as like maybe an infantryman or a ranger or some special forces guy like some of these other guys were.
Yeah.
But nobody judged.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that we all follow a different path, and that the fact that we raised our right hand, we all served, we
Mhm.
all struggled, we all went through it, and we're all trying to get through it together. It was amazing. So I found my community in that sense, and that was one thing that even after I decided that it was time for me to make a change after my brother passed, if I didn't have those people surrounding me, encouraging me and creating that environment that was safe to talk about what I wanted to do and not judgmental, then
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to do it. So my advice to veterans who are going through this process is make sure when you are transitioning that when you figure out where you're going, you find that group of people or a group of people. It doesn't matter if it's the right one or not, but there's always going to be at least one or two people that you connect with out of a large group.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
go and find a group of people that you feel comfortable with connecting, that you feel comfortable connecting with. That way you can start those conversations early, and hopefully, I don't think there's anything perfect that you can do, but hopefully that will help you move forward.
Yeah. And you just made me think of a couple of things. One of the things about veterans when they're out that I don't know if they know this, but it just hit me to just kind of say this. And by the way, I'm also an Army veteran of 8 years. So I have some knowledge on this stuff, not exactly, like JJ, but or some of the other veterans, but there's plenty of knowledge on this.
Sure.
One of the things that hit me was brotherhood, sisterhood. Even though the way we lived life in the military is not the same as it is becoming a civilian, there is a sameness, which is the brotherhood and sisterhood of the military, that when you take that step, when you take that leap from getting out, and even if you're going through things, you still have that. We're still out here. We're still available for you. And it is scary to ask for help. We're not trained to ask for help, you know? So that was a huge thing for me. And that is one thing that I will absolutely say, because I would literally rather go down the hole of depression at that time than ask for help, because I knew that I could handle it. Well, there's a point where it's not handleable on your own. I don't know if that's a word, but it is not handleable on your own.
It is today.
Stuff up. It is today. Yeah. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask the question. I mean, there's enough stuff that causes that fear from past experience, from things going on in the world, all these different things. But the last thing you need to be afraid of is to connect with other veterans and connect with the help. And if you can't find it at the VA, there's sometimes that's not an option. I've experienced that too. You know, there are groups out there who will take you in and pull you in as their brother or sister, and help you and walk with you and sit with you and love you. And all these things are there for you. So that is like, I implore, I implore you to just recognize that and see it in yourself enough where you're like, they know me, you know?
Well, and it doesn't have to be veteran groups either. If you transition and you don't necessarily want anything to do with fellow veterans, because sometimes you're just trying to separate yourself from the lifestyle.
Yes.
You like to go biking. Go to Facebook. There are biking groups. Go to your local rec center. There are biking groups.
Yeah.
You know, biking, running. It could be boat, kayaking. I mean, it doesn't really matter what it is. Find something that interests you and go, and just don't do it alone. When you sit by yourself and you isolate from other people, you very quickly slip into a place that's not very healthy.
Yeah, I understand that completely. Yes, thank you for using that word. Isolation is not a good place to be.
No.
And I'm wondering though, JJ, from your personal journey, how did that shape the work that you do now, and what are you doing to support others? I mean, give us a little more detail on that, because I think it's really cool what you do.
Yeah. So first of all, the whole reason I started a business is that I noticed that the company that I was working in, we would promote people into management positions, and just like everyone else sees in the civilian workforce, they get zero support, zero anything. Here's your team. This is your new set of responsibilities, and they kind of let you go and flop like a dying dolphin into whatever abyss you decide to run into.
Right.
Well, so I do have a training program that I help new managers with. I also offer coaching for new managers to help them through the complexities of that new position, dealing with other people specifically. But aside from that, I have a training program for senior leaders as well that focuses on leading with resilience and helping people through the complexities there. And that's basically most of it. My training also focuses on teaching people how to reframe negativity into positivity, and giving the parallels on how, when you're dealing with other people, you know, not always thinking that they're trying to do bad things all the time. Sometimes, you know, good intentions don't always come out looking like good intentions. Sometimes it looks like they're trying to step on somebody else, or sometimes they're trying to do, it may look like they're trying to do bad things at work, but understanding that most times people don't show up to work trying to cause trouble for anybody else. They're just trying to make money so that they can go pay their bills just like everybody else. And so reframing that into something that can create a positive conversation instead of a negative conversation. It's really all focused around making sure that you can be the most empathetic leader you can possibly be.
Yeah. And I like how you use the word resilience, because I'm going to go back into that whole veteran thing again. There's something about veterans that are very resilient. So even with I like how you are teaching them or reteaching them or reminding them about their resilience also. But I think that that's That's awesome.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
it definitely. I can have one client in a couple months, or I can have 10 clients in a couple of months, and just the fact that I'm helping people, it's more important. And this may sound weird, but it's more important than the money I make, because
Mhm.
this job is also my therapy,
Yeah.
because
Yeah. No,
I
I
get to
get
help
it.
people. Yep.
I get it. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah, no,
Right.
100%. Yeah. And I've got a few questions specifically about how you do your work, like, or not even necessarily your work, but in general with the work that you do. What can you tell people that's an immediate change that leaders can implement today to foster a culture of open communication and trust within their teams in business?
Hmm. Well, that's a good question. So I would say that once you make that transition to being a manager, and you're not that line worker anymore, or whatever the case, stocking shelves, now you're leading a team. It's not about you. It's always about them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to create a good culture, take your wants and needs out of it, and transform those wants and needs into what your employees need to thrive
Mm-hmm.
in that environment. So that you have a mission, and for the military people that might be listening to this, think of that as the commander's intent. It's the overall goal of what you're doing to get everything accomplished. That should be your want and need. And then when you're dealing with your people, it's how can you constantly support them and empower them to do what they got to do without always being in their business.
Right, right. That's great. That's great. And it almost sounds like those leadership manuals that they had for us to train us in the military too.
Well, but believe it or not, it works. I had a
It
lot
does.
of success in my civilian positions, following those same principles and guidelines that we
Mhm.
learned throughout the multitude of leadership courses that they put us through in the military. If you actually
Absolutely.
listen and you remember that stuff,
Yeah. Well, that's the
it
stuff.
works.
Yeah, and it's so weird because that a lot of that is what ingrained into me too. I remember that stuff, even watching things going on in the world right now. And I remember things like one of the things I remember is as a leader, when you come into a position of management or leadership or whatever it is, you don't wipe everything at this all at once because it messes everything up, right?
Yep.
You walk in and you watch and you
Yep.
see what is it that works, what doesn't work, what can we bring to the table to make it work, who do we need to make that work, that sort of
Yep.
thing. It's not just like we're done, because that messes people up. It creates chaos, and in that chaos it also creates mental health issues. So here's my next question. It's how can leaders integrate mental health advocacy in workplaces or entrepreneur, or if they're doing it themselves or whatever, into their daily interactions so they can create a more resilient and supportive work environment instead of the chaos?
The main thing I want to bring up is, we talked about isolation before.
Mm-hmm.
So when when no with there are many managers that feel like they need to lead from way too far back. It's either that, or they're too involved in the business of their employees. Well, you got to find that
Can I,
dichotomy. You got to find that middle
yeah.
ground.
Can I ask you something just to add to that? What about like managers or leaders who lead with fear? Isn't that part of the
Yes,
challenge? Yeah.
yes. So there, let's start with that first,
Okay.
because fear is interesting. If you took a management position and you are scared of those interactions with your employees,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, that's very natural. It's very natural. If you're not used to dealing with tough problems, those tough problems are not going to come easily.
Right.
If you have some arguing amongst employees, or if you have somebody who's trying to be difficult or whatever, and you are not the type of person that would typically get involved with that sort of a thing,
Mm-hmm.
that is not easy.
Yeah.
So give yourself a little bit of grace first. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with that, and you go in there and the very first thing you do is avoid it, it needs to be addressed. Yeah, talk to somebody that you trust where you work. Ask them for some training, ask them for some help, ask them for some advice, but you have to figure out ways to overcome that, because you cannot be a successful manager without having the hard conversations, without doing the hard things.
Mm-hmm.
If you lead with fear,
Mm-hmm.
your entire team is going to suffer for it. They're going to see you as, and I don't take this the wrong way, but they're going to kind of see you as a chicken. They're no longer going to see you as an authority,
Yeah.
and they're going to separate themselves from you farther and farther and farther, and they're not going to trust you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
however you have to bridge that gap, whether it's seeking therapy on your own because you have some deep-seated issues that are keeping you from having those conversations or interactions, or if it's just discomfort because it's new, if it's therapy, that's important. Do that. If you have those deep-seated issues, if it's just discomfort, seek the help of a director, of another manager, or somebody that you trust that can help you get through that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, it can definitely mess things up, and mess things up in a bad way. And the last thing you want is to be fired from your first management position just because you never addressed it.
Right. Right.
And I'm trying not to be negative with that, because it's not a negative thing. It's
Yeah.
actually extremely normal. But other than that, I don't even remember where the original question was. But the very first thing you need to do when you become a manager is make sure you're figuring out how to balance conversations with your employees regularly to get to know all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, I mean, the biggest mistake managers make is get too involved in their team,
Mm-hmm.
or not get involved enough.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be able to delegate and empower your people, you need to know who's really good at what and who's not really good at what. And the only way you can do that is to have regular conversations, maybe every once in a while monitor each person's performance, and then do the one thing we all hate, and that's monitor those stupid metrics. And
Right.
right. You have to do all of those things. You have to balance it to figure out what's going right and what's going wrong, so that you don't have to do it all alone.
Yeah.
Most managers feel like they have to do it all alone when they first take that role.
Yeah. Well, life isn't about doing stuff alone, but I kind of threw a wrench in there with the fear question, but the original question was how to integrate mental health advocacy.
Mental health advocacy.
Mental health.
I just went mental on that question.
You did. And so did I.
It's okay. No. So mental health advocacy. So it's kind of similar.
Uh-huh.
If you want your employees to feel included at work, you have to talk to them. You have to figure out who they are. Some people want to have all the interaction. They want to talk to everybody every day, and they want to get to know people and all this other stuff. But some people are happy just kind of staying in their own lane and not really dealing with too many people at all.
And you're talking about the leader or the person working for them?
The people, yeah. So
the people.
Mental health advocacy. So the manager's job is to make sure everybody's taken care of.
Right.
Especially if you want to be considered a leader. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to be considered a leader, you just want to hold that title of a manager. I mean, sit in your office all day. See how long that can last you. But
see what kind of a mental health crisis that will cause.
It'll definitely cause a lot of chaos and confusion.
Yeah.
Especially
not what
when
you want.
It's not what you want. No, let the employees figure it out on their own.
Yeah,
let's see how that goes.
Right.
No, but when it comes to mental health, they have to feel included. And I just mentioned getting to know people and understanding their strengths and weaknesses. Well, that's also getting to know them, because if, say, some people's acting out of sorts on any given day, if you know that person,
mm-hmm.
you know who they typically talk to, you know all the things about the performance and everything, well, then you can go to them and ask them what's going on. They probably will answer with I'm fine. But then you can go to the people that they normally talk to and say, hey, have you noticed anything different about Joe Snuffy over there? Because he's acting different than he normally does.
Yeah.
And you can't do that if you don't know your employees. And so in a management role, in order to incorporate mental health advocacy, you have to get to know your people on a slightly personal level so that you can understand when things are out of sorts. And that way you can also address it with who's most important. they won't always tell you necessarily, because I don't know about you, but I don't, in a large group of people, I don't like walking in there and saying, I just cried myself to sleep last night and I don't feel like being here today. I'm not going to say that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so if a manager asks me about it, I'm probably not going to say anything, regardless of whether I trust that person or not. But
Right.
if you know that person and you know who they talk to, then you can address it in a roundabout way. And then you can bring that person back in and say, hey, I've noticed this. We need to talk.
Yeah.
Then they'll open up to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it brings up a thing about the way most people work in the world, I would think. I'm not a good portion of people, but we talk about humanity. We talk about our humanness. We talk about like the truth of who we are, right? It comes
Sure.
out when you're in an environment that creates that, like you were talking about. It's like if you, as a leader, manager, or whatever, if you're bringing that to the table, then you are able to be a better leader when you can recognize what's going on in other people, even if they don't want to talk about it, or maybe they want to talk offline, or maybe they want to talk in another situation or something like that. But to me, a good leader is recognizing, like you're saying, the difference between, just because you come in one day and you're messing everything up and you're doing it, doesn't mean that you're a bad employee. It just
No.
means something's going on. But there are a lot of leaders out there who don't really either care to know or to dig deeper, or they don't understand how to do that. And I
Yeah.
think that's helpful so people can understand what that looks like, because it's so important when you have a business to know who's working with you. I mean, it's a family, it's a second family. You're with them probably more than they're with their own families. It's good to know who they are. It's good to be that person to bring that together, and the way you describe that to me feels or sounds like a way of bringing people together rather than, I'm the boss. I've had plenty of bosses like that. I didn't like it. I don't
No.
like that. So thanks for that, because I think it's important that people understand what that really is, or what that looks like in any kind of a work environment. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I kind of consider myself an empathetic leader as well,
Mm-hmm.
just because I don't know. If we spend most of our life at work, I don't feel like it should be a negative experience for anybody.
No, no, I agree. Absolutely. I mean, and trust me, I've had plenty of negative work experiences.
Uh, yeah,
On that
especially
role.
in the military. Not everybody takes this leadership training we get in the military to heart.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not everybody there, and I wish they had that leadership training in civilian life
Yeah.
too, because
Yeah.
there were so many times that if I could just and they look down, people look down on you if you are more empathetic than they are.
Yeah.
That's a challenge. So
But that's where you balance it, because if they expect you to be a strong, hard charging person, well,
mhm,
then there are certain times where when you need to stick up for a certain person on your team or something like that,
yeah,
where now that type A can come out.
right,
But
right.
there's no sense in walking around with a type A hard charging, hard ASS personality all the time, because that doesn't really get you anywhere.
But that's not humanity. That's exactly the opposite of it. To me, it's like, yeah,
Can
be
be.
hard charging, but not. It's almost like a few of the bosses that I've had in my life were ones that were like that. They were hard charging. They were always working. They didn't like their spouse or whatever. So they stayed at work all day or after hours or whatever. And they had an expectation
That's not
of
realistic.
their employee. But this was also 25 years ago. So it was a little bit different back then. But it was the most ridiculous thing it's like, I have a life. Just because you cannot get along with your wife, and I knew the whole story of a certain
Yep.
boss because I was the secretary at the time, right? And it was like, I don't care if you want to work until 8 o'clock tonight. I'm not going to do that, So you find that kind of stuff everywhere, or at least 25 years ago. I think I feel like things have changed quite a bit. I feel like people's mentality and understanding about how things work like that have changed quite a bit, but there are
Yeah.
still businesses that run like that.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that's not all the way across the board. You know, I've had conversations. I was on somebody else's podcast, um, and he was a Marine, and then he owned his own construction company, and now he has he went into software. We talked about this sort of a thing, and in the construction world, some of that still exists just because of the personalities that exist on the ground when on the teams out there doing construction.
Yeah.
And the some of them sometimes the mentality is that you got to get a bigger hammer when the problem gets bigger, and sometimes a bigger hammer is only going to get you in bigger trouble. And that's
Right.
you
Right.
got to I know you can't put everybody in the same box and treat everybody the same. That's not it. But you got to get that's why you got to get to know people,
Mhm.
because if you understand who somebody is,
Yeah.
you'll know if you can elevate your language to a little bit more inappropriate every once in a while just to get their attention, or if you need to stay even keel
Yeah.
and not ever raise your voice and talk to somebody just intelligently through conversation. I mean, you just need to know the bottom line is, if you want to lead in a workplace, you have to know your people.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, can you walk us through a real life scenario where empathetic leadership turned a challenging situation into a success story? And what steps can our audience take to replicate that success?
That's a good question.
Hmm.
Let me see. Yes. So let's use one. Um, One of my first jobs after I got out of the military is I worked at Lowe's for a little while.
Hmm.
And I was a senior manager for the merchandising. And, I technically didn't work for the store. So my boss was at corporate, and then the store manager was the store manager. They had a different hierarchy.
Right.
Well, there was a time where we had to uh, redo all the shelves throughout the whole store, because if a customer went to the website and they needed to look for the parts for something specific, it wasn't always where it said it was. And so we needed to do a major overhaul just because the system updated to make it match what they had. We had conversations and we planned it for a very, very long time.
Hmm.
It was probably about 4 months that we planned how we were going to do this, and we checked in every week. Well, once it got to about 5 weeks out, we checked in every week to figure out how we were going to do that, how they were going to provide personnel, and I was going to provide personnel so we could make this work.
Hmm.
Well, when it came time for us to actually execute, we were 48 hours out, and out of nowhere, the store manager and the assistant store manager decided they were going to tell me that we can't provide any personnel to do this anymore. So I had to do a major shift. And my first reaction, if you could imagine, after
4 months.
almost 5.5 weeks of
Oh,
talking about this,
yeah. Yeah.
my chest, my head, and my whole body was just hot because I was angry.
Hmm.
So, this wasn't necessarily one of my employees, but the thought that was running through my mind was, I'm going to have to go tell the team that we're going to have to do this whole thing and still keep up with the daily duties that we're assigned to do every day. And I only had 15 people on my team. So
It's a big
I
store.
it was a big
It's
story,
a big
yes.
store.
And so I took a deep breath and I got quiet. And they're like, JJ, are you okay?
Yeah.
And I said, just one moment, please. And I sat there and I breathed a little bit. And instead of saying all the obscenities I was thinking, I looked at the store manager and the assistant store manager and I said, I just have to ask you a question and you can answer it however you want. I want your honest answer. If we were in opposite situations, because I have to answer my team and I have to answer to my boss on what you just got done telling me. But if the tables were turned, how would you feel about the conversation that just took place? And they went, well, we can do what we can do. And I'm like, That's fine. But how would you feel? And they told me that they probably wouldn't be very happy about it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I am so glad that you said that. So, how are you going to help me fix this? And because I didn't start screaming, and they expected me to, that
Yeah.
assistant store manager, for whatever reason, because he was technically merchandising and I was merchandising, he didn't like me just inherently anyway, which was fine. I worked through that, but we worked it out. I got a little bit of their personnel. I was able to explain to my team that we had to do some personnel changes and maybe do a little bit of extra work on the regular duty side, and then also do a little bit of extra work on the on the rearranging side, and it all worked out just fine.
Mhm.
But the reason that I provided this story specifically is that a lot of people have a very quick reactive way of handling difficult conversations.
Mhm.
And that specific instance, the reason that it worked out so well is because I was able to keep a level head,
Mhm.
have a conversation without getting my emotions involved,
Mhm.
and work it out like like a civilized human being. Even though I could tell by the look in their eyes that they expected that conversation to
Mhm.
go differently, I didn't feed into that.
Yep.
So anytime somebody is dealing with a difficult situation on their team, maybe with a maybe with another manager, or even their boss or anything like that, always try very hard in a professional environment. This doesn't always work in a personal environment, but when you are in a professional environment, to keep a level head about yourself. When you start getting emotion involved, you're not doing your job anymore.
So,
And
oh,
and
go ahead, finish.
sorry, and from
Go
a
ahead.
mental health perspective,
Yeah.
and I did this too, after it was all said and done, we started doing the work, executed on what we all agreed with. I made sure that I pulled both of them off to the side
Mhm.
and I had a conversation about how that made me feel,
Mm.
and how we can address these situations in the future so that this doesn't happen again. And they heard me out. It was very constructive, and
Mhm.
as a result, everybody was fine.
Mhm.
So don't keep it to yourself and stuff it down. Don't just get angry and then stuff it down. Make sure you address it. But there's an appropriate time and place for everything, and treat everybody with respect always.
Yep. Yeah. I really like that because I'm going to poke in here with the reason why that worked.
Okay.
The actual human, how the body works, how all that stuff works, because I learned that and I thought, I was thinking it was all coming in and I was like, oh good, this is an opportunity so people know that it's not like just this random thing how that happens. But when you, let's see if I can get this. When you are confronted, when we are confronted with something and we get angry, our frontal lobe literally shuts off. And what happens is the blood shunts to the back of the brain to the, uh, what do you call it? The primordial,
Yeah.
yeah, that thing.
I don't know
And
what it's called either,
I can't
but
think
our
of it
primal
right now. It's
instincts start
okay.
kicking in. Yes.
Yeah, so it starts kicking in, but what's interesting is it goes through your occipital region, which is why you see red, which is why you get angry. And when it shuts down, you can't think straight, right? So there's
Yep.
no opportunity to do what you did in the way that you did it in at the beginning of that whole thing. So what I learned with that was when you start to feel that, if you're in a situation like that and you start to feel that way, that breath, and that we have like a split second of time where we can make a choice, where the frontal lobe is still online and we can still make a choice. So that breath gave you that opportunity to flip that switch and stay online. So taking a deep breath before you react, that's not even a response, that's a reaction. If you get angry and you come out fighting immediately, that's a normal human reaction to in a fight or flight situation, right?
Mhm.
So instead of having that happen, you flip the switch by taking the breath. You took that opportunity and you were able to flip that. And that's important because you don't want to create a worse situation by reacting in that way, because you're going to come out in that reptilian or mammalian, whatever that is, and you're ready. I'm ready to go, right? And that's not going to help you in any way, especially in a job. Not going
Right.
to help you in a relationship, not going to help you in anything, right? So then the part where you, because you did that, you were able to think your way through this at that moment. And you were able to make a decision to go for the mental health piece of it and talk to them about it later. Now, this part's important because we have been taught, especially our generations, that feeling things or even being able to recognize our feelings is not good, right? It's changing, things are changing, but the fact that you had that conversation and you were willing to share what your feeling was, that you were able to create another opportunity to work through it with them. Because what happens when we share our feelings is that other people can empathize with us because they would have felt the same way because you already had that conversation with them, right? And so they understand, sure, I was angry because we'd already talked about this and we already worked through this and we already did this. And right now you're flipping it on me and changing the scenario. And now you want me to flip with you? No. So
So,
was a great example of a creation of how to bring a successful outcome to a situation like that. And the fact that you were able to stay in that, like I've never been good at doing that. I can say that. I know how it works. I've just not ever been good at doing it because I've always been afraid of confrontation. That was my thing back in the day. But thank you for that. That's a great example. I love that.
well, so when I was on active duty, I was trained in a program called Master Resiliency Training, and so they
Master resiliency training.
Master Resiliency Training. I went to the University of Pennsylvania
Mm-hmm.
uh, to learn it, and then I had to teach it. I probably taught, if I went and looked back at it, I think it's even on my resume, but it was almost 5,000 people that I had to teach this program to. And part of that program, we're supposed to coach a few different people through the reaction model, and we had to teach the emotional intelligence model to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even I mean, it was a time where we were coming out of combat, and there was a lot of problems with people integrating back into their regular lives in garrison.
Yeah.
So the emotional intelligence model was, you start off with self-awareness, you move into self-regulation, then you have social awareness and relationship management. And so that's not the only time I've had to react to a situation like that since I've been out of the military, but I always remember that model, because if you can get yourself through something without that reactivity stage
Mm-hmm.
of letting your fight or flight kick in, then it's always going to be more productive. But you got to understand the why behind it. And so, I encourage anybody to study emotional intelligence, or EQ, because that model right there will help you understand kind of how to take yourself from here
Mm-hmm.
up high to just an even keel very quickly. If you
Yeah.
can understand what um, the self-awareness phase, where you understand when that anger hits, which is what you just got done
Mm-hmm.
describing. It's just a different way of saying it.
Yeah, yeah, and emotional intelligence is a huge factor in being able to live life in general. Just period.
Yes.
End of story. Because
Yep.
when we understand our own emotions and we understand how other people's emotions are working, then we know how to deal with people. We know how to communicate. We know how to, you know, make things happen.
Yes.
There's so many things that can be done with emotional intelligence. So
Yep.
that's great. Thank you. I'm gonna probably put that on the description so people will maybe a link to finding other information on that or whatever. Now, when we talked, when we first met and we started talking, there was something I pulled energetically from you, and it was you're going to remember it when I say it. I know it's not your normal thing, but um I asked you if you were an empath.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was interesting to me because over the past few years I've met so many veterans who are actually empaths. I've been married to veterans who were pretty narcissistic. So this is a whole new world for me,
Met a
and
few of those
I'm
too.
intrigued, right? And I'm intrigued. I am so intrigued by that. So when you went through all of your healing work, because we're coming from a different, more of a like raising consciousness kind of conversation at this point. How do you see individual healing work similar to what you did for yourself contributing to a larger societal transformation?
So I'm a former service member. So are you. Um, my biggest struggle getting out of the military was figuring out where I fit in.
Mm,
So everything that I do now, through networking, through everything I do, I try to find common ground with other people.
mhm,
And the biggest common ground that I had a choke point with when I was trying to figure this out was, when you tell people you served in the military, they automatically think that you're this, I don't know, maybe they have an idea of what a service member is from watching movies and all this other stuff. And that's, I don't know how to explain it to people, but that's not it. And so when they start, I just let them, even though I get super angry sometimes with the questions that people ask me, I try very hard to be um, patient, and I
mhm,
answer their questions, and I let them know where my boundaries are, because there are certain things that about our military past that I don't go there, and I don't even go there for me, so I'm not going to go there for anybody else.
mhm,
And but I try very hard to explain things to people so that they can find their common ground with people that served, so that it's not this elephant in the room.
right.
And I think that, specifically people like you and me who served and had to transition into civilian life, I think that if you go out and you find common ground, if you start noticing that people are looking at you weird while you're saying things and you start asking them, well, what did you get out of that? Because I noticed you looked at me weird or something like that. And you just have good conversations with people. It,
Mhm,
your transition is going to become easier. Your relationships are going to become much more clear, even if they're only professional.
mhm,
And that transition, instead of it being a long, hard process, it's going to be one where you build relationships, and your community is not just going to be with people that wore the uniform. It's going to
mhm.
be with other people that they're they're interested in learning more, because most people, they're just interested. That's why they ask all the dumb questions. And I
Yeah.
say dumb because they annoy the crap out of me, but that doesn't matter. I don't say that to them.
That's good. That's good. Well, and it brings up another question, and I'm curious, and just for reference, so what do you think for yourself when people say thank you for your service? What's going on in your head? Because I know what's going on in mine. I'm just curious to hear what's going on in yours.
At first, there was always the, you have no idea what that even means.
Hmm.
But now I think to myself, when you start listening to political conversations about how the government as a whole feels about the people who wore the uniform and how they want to take care of them, the Democrat, Republican, left, right, it really doesn't matter. Everybody wants to support their service members. I think about that because, you know, thank you for your service means you did something that they weren't willing to do or couldn't do or whatever the case may be. And you sacrificed a certain portion of your life to raise your right hand and do something that's different
That
than
most
the
people
average
wouldn't do.
person who goes out and gets a job. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I mean, when I don't take offense to that. I actually feel complimented by it, even though some people do not. Again, it to me, it's all about finding common ground and figuring out where I fit in society now that I'm not wearing the uniform anymore.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, because I've had experiences where I've talked to people, or I've thought about it also, is like, if you're a combat veteran, my service involved doing things that I didn't necessarily want to be doing.
Yeah, correct.
So that to me would feel like a hard thing to receive when people say it. But I was just curious because I think it's interesting how different people respond to that same statement. So the name of this podcast is Awakening Soul Divinity. So I'm curious, because this is not a normal conversation, how would you define awakening?
Awakening. When I think of awakening, I think of opening your eyes and seeing things new, like you do every day. Every day is a different day. So, awakening is figuring out, for me, awakening is where did I fit? When I was younger and I was going through all that tough stuff and I decided to serve in the military, I had to figure out where I fit there.
Mhm.
And so awakening is that moment where you figure out what your purpose is, what you want to do, what maybe for some people it's about maybe they pray a lot. I know I have been, especially since my first deployment. I've been praying a lot more because things happened with some of my best friends that I was downrange with while they were close to me
Mhm.
that I don't know why it didn't happen to me too, but it didn't. Just like it didn't happen to me the same way it didn't happen the way it happened to my brother. So purpose, why am I here?
Mhm.
Clarity is what awakening is for me.
Okay. All right. What are your thoughts on the healing of the divine feminine? We kind of talked about this a little bit, so we're going to see where this goes and how it relates to the healing of the divine masculine.
So let I've been thinking about this ever since we talked about it before we went live.
Yeah.
And it's
Wait, now people, normally we're talking about raising consciousness and all this woo woo stuff. And I bring in a solid veteran who has been in combat and all this stuff. And I'm asking him this question. I just wanted to find out what he thought about it. So here we go.
so everyone has every man has a feminine side and they also have a masculine side. So when I think of both divinity or not, there's two sides to a person. I mean, even females. I mean, they they have testosterone just like they have estrogen. So if you want to think about it that way, you know, take it down a step and bring it to the very basic. And you have to come to terms with both of those things. And on a chemical level, there's got to be balance. So on a there's ego and all kinds of things that go along with that. And so there's got to be balance in all of that. I mean, to feel like a man, there's certain things we have to do, there's certain things we have to experience, and there's certain ways that we would like to be treated.
Mhm.
But, we also have, and don't take this the wrong way, please. But that when I think of the feminine side, I think of the emotional side. So
Right.
we also have to be in touch with that too, because in order to make emotional connections with other people, we don't, you say woo woo. We don't, guys, we don't do woo woo as well as some females out there. So when you put it that way, you got to find balance with that too. You want to make emotional connections. You want people to be able to talk to you. But on the other side of that, you have to be this person that people will go to get things done and do things. And so, I mean, it's to me, that's just finding balance with both.
Mhm. And if I may,
Hmm.
there's a part of that where, like, the feminine is not just an emotional thing. It's
No.
also receptivity and compassion and things
Yes.
like that. So men are receptive, men are compassionate. It's still there, but what I want to just kind of share with this is that when you're balanced in the masculine and feminine, then you're not swinging all the way over to one side or the other side. And it doesn't matter what gender you are. It's like, it's just a human way of being on this planet.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about, oh, well, I'm a tough guy and I got to be a tough guy and I got to prove myself and I can't cry and I can't do this or it's not about that. It's not about like, oh, I can't, because women aren't like that either,
No.
So that's the thing. It's like the balance is you can still be powerful and you can still have emotions and you can still take action and you can still do all kinds of things. That's the balance. You can still be compassionate, even if you're a man.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yep.
that's kind of, yeah. So in this scenario, that's what I wanted to add to that because it's important that men and women understand that. Like
Yeah.
even women who have been in the military, when we go in the military, can I just tell you how many times I had to prove myself to the men in the military? Like I was a medic at first when I went in. We were training with an engineer platoon or a company. I don't know, whatever it was. And they would have me do what they do so I could prove that I could hang. And I'm like, okay, I get it, but it was just so odd to me at the time that it was going on until I figured out what they were doing. But the respect that I got afterwards from them was like over the top.
Yeah.
So, but what I'm saying is like as women in the military, it's almost like, or it feels like back in when I was in that we had to prove ourselves back then. I don't know what it's like now. I can't speak to that. But back then we had to prove ourselves. We had to be, I remember I found a picture of me talking to a first sergeant one time. I was a first lieutenant or something, and we were at AT, and I was looking at the picture, and he's like jotting down these notes, and I'm standing there with my finger, I'm not pointing at him, I'm just talking about whatever, and I'm like, that's me being the action-oriented, masculine, whatever, you know what I mean? And it was cute.
And what a dynamic to balance,
right?
You are a female serving in the military, especially if you end up going to an infantry unit or God forbid a unit where it's mostly mechanics or something like that. I mean, it's there are still certain, I'll call it, industries within the military that are still very male ego focused sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so but females still exist there. I mean, they have HR and everything else where they have females, and even though you're not going to typically find a female down on the line in an infantry unit, they still exist there.
Mm-hmm.
So they train together, they do everything together, and so they do have to prove themselves a little bit more.
Yeah.
And honestly, you want to, because even guys, if they don't fit, they get harassed. So a female, it's even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even more reason, actually, because you're not one of the dudes, to get harassed. And so that's an interesting dynamic to try to balance.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? There are a lot of hardcore females in the military.
Oh, yes.
Just to say that. I mean, but
I can name a dozen off the top of my head that I joked with all the time, but when it came to certain things, I was like, nope, I don't want to do combatives with you. I'm not going to race you. I'm not going to try to do pugil sticks with you. I'm not going to do any of that stuff.
She's going to kick my butt.
She gonna embarrass the crap out of me in front of everybody else.
The last thing you want to do is be embarrassed. Yes. I get it.
Yes.
So, wow. All right. Well, that was a great conversation.
I had fun.
I did too. So how can people get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way is to just Google Victory Leadership Coaching, or you can just go to Google and type in hashtag veteran leader trainer, all one word, and you'll see more of me than you'll see anything else. But if you go to my social media or anywhere else, there's my link tree, and there's a way to book an appointment with me or call me or whatever the case may be. And I encourage you to do so, even if we're not going to do business. I love learning about new people.
And maybe,
and if you're a veteran who has a business, definitely contact me, because I want to talk to you about my podcast.
I was just going to say that. And
Okay,
all of
good.
this information is going to be in the description, so you'll be able to find it there too.
There you go.
Yep. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Well, yes. You
Good.
know, we talked about a lot of things in this conversation, but make sure no matter what you're doing that you try to find a way to build confidence, not just in what you're doing, because that's not as important as building confidence in yourself. Because if you can build confidence in yourself, then you can be the person that you want to be. And don't shy away from challenges, because comfort is actually the enemy of succeeding in anything that you're doing.
Yes, thank you. And I want to add a little to that because from my perspective of doing the healing and trauma work with people and grief work with people, when you make the decision to heal yourself, everything that JJ said just now will become a piece of cake. Everything will come to you. It's just you make the decision, you step into it, you heal yourself, and you have so many opportunities and things just, it's almost, I mean, probably hard to believe at this point if you're not in that space, but it becomes magical. It really becomes magical. I feel that's been my experience. So, again, just a reminder, don't isolate, ask for help, and be willing to accept it, because you deserve it.
And do hard things.
And do hard things because that's hard.
Yes, it is.
That
Yes,
is hard.
All of those things that Caroline said, very hard.
Very hard. All right. Well, thanks, JJ. I really appreciate you coming on and joining me on the Awakening Soul Divinity podcast. And have a blessed day and peace.